Hello everyone and welcome. We've got Eva Hussain, who's Polaron's very own director and an expert on all things to do with citizenship. Today we're going to be discussing basic eligibility to gain Polish citizenship. So we'll get started straight away. Eva, what makes someone eligible for Polish citizenship?
Thank you, Stephanie. The only thing you need to have to qualify through descent is Polish blood. What does that mean, however? Sometimes people ask us whether something like a DNA test is sufficient. They will ask us what sort of documents do I need to have. They will ask us about, how do I know that I qualify? So the first thing I would suggest that people do is put together any information, any documents they have about their family and complete a family tree. So we're not talking about an extensive family tree that goes back generations and generations, but just starting with yourself, your parents and your grandparents. And in that family tree, very quickly, we'll be able to work out whether you qualify Polish citizenship through descent or not. And I should say that although the Polish law is the same for everybody, each circumstance is slightly different. So we do look at, your individual journey or your individual circumstances. So one of the things we check is where you were born and what year you were born. The other thing we check is what year your parents or one of the parents, on the Polish line was born and what year your parents married and where. And if we need to go back to a generation further, let's say your grandparents or grandparents, we need to know when they left Poland, when they naturalized. So all kinds of information to paint that picture of who's who and what happened to them. Because essentially your citizenship is based on the continuity of the bloodline. And the Polish government, when they issue confirmation of citizenship, they confirmed that you were born Polish. So you're Polish from birth. And therefore, what we prove through the process is, again, who you are in relation to your direct ancestor that was Polish. And did anything happen in the time or from the time that they left Poland and you were born to affect your citizenship? So it is kind of by exclusion more than inclusion, if that makes sense. So they will, the Polish government will assume that if you have Polish ancestors, you're probably Polish. However, there may be things that would affect your citizenship because of what happened, sometimes mostly unbeknown to people that you're related to. So some of the things that might affect your eligibility include, for your ancestors, service in the foreign army, becoming a citizen of another country, for women, marriage. So really we look at your situation individually, firstly to check if you qualify on paper, and secondly, which is kind of even more difficult than confirming that whether you qualify or not, what documents you have. No government in the world will believe your word for it. So you do have to provide documentation proving everything that you tell them. And that set of documents does need to be presented in a particular way. So we're talking about certification of documents, everything has to be translated. But the main kind of challenge, I guess, is that Poland doesn't really give you a checklist of what you need to give them. Essentially, what they'll say to you, Stephanie, is something like, give us everything you've got and we tell you if you're Polish or not. And therefore, documents that we provide vary from case to case, necessarily. Because if you know anything about Polish history, particularly after the war or during the war, our clients' ancestors ended up, say, in Germany undocumented, and a lot of documents were recreated based on verbal statements. So they cannot be trusted because there were mistakes, there were lots of discrepancies. So therefore, the one thing that the Polish government will always ask for is Polish documents. So ones that were created in Poland, because they are most trustworthy. Sometimes people say to us, well, I've got my grandmother's birth certificate, she was born in Poland, is that enough? The answer is no, because just like you were not born in Poland and you're a Polish citizen, she may have been born in Poland, but it wasn't, if you know what I mean, because it's not the birth itself that is the main criteria, I guess. So in terms of the type of documents that we might require for your grandma, if you have one, it would be her residential records, potentially school records, Polish passport. For men, it would be army service documents. So there's a whole range of things that we can provide. But the main takeaway from what I'm saying is that we can very quickly tell you if you qualify on paper, because we look at the dates of your family's history in the context of the Polish legislation. So Poland has legislation that was introduced quite recently in 2013. However, they use superseded or obsolete legislation to look at your case, because they look at it in a time scale, I guess, to see if anything happened to affect your ancestors' citizenship and therefore yours. So I don't know if that makes sense, but essentially, firstly, check if you qualify. If you do, what documents do you have? Are they enough? And sometimes it's a little bit discretionary. So like I said, for some other countries, when you apply for citizenship or confirming citizenship, they will give you a very strict checklist that you need to give them. For Poland, it's not like that.
Okay, and yeah, why is it different for Poland? Is it just the choice of the government, or?
Well, because they can't tell you what you have to have. Essentially, if your grandmother went through, camps in Germany or Siberia,
Yeah.
you may have very little, and it depends also where people come from. So if it's within today's borders of Poland, you will be most likely more successful in gaining or finding documentation. But if it's former territories, it's a bit harder. So they can't give you a very specific checklist. They can give you a list of types of documents. And on balance, they look at your case, and on balance, they decide if that's enough or not enough. And sometimes when we file applications or we take them on, we're like, that's going to go right through. There's some niggly bit of somebody's name or date of birth that the Polish government picks up. Other times we think, it's a bit weak, and it goes right through. So it just really depends. In Poland, it goes through office that's called the voivodeship office. There you'll get a case officer, assigned to your case, and they will assess it. And sometimes their assessment differs from ours in detail. So it's not even whether you qualify or not, but they might ask for an extra document, or they might do their own research, or they might find something that we were and our clients were not aware of. Often it happens that they do use their own channels to find information. In Poland, they can't search for information outside of Poland, but in Poland they can. And that might raise questions, or they may, not be as sure as we are that you have put your case forward in a way that it, allows them to approve it.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was a very thorough overlook of eligibility for descent, which is great. We do have a question from an audience member. This one's from Nick. He asked, how long does the process take to gain citizenship?
Okay, so this particular route, which is called the descent route, is made up of two things. The first one is registration of your vital records, and that happens through the civil registry office, and that can take 3 to 4 months. And it's just a transcription of your birth and marriage certificate if you're married. So at the end of that, you receive your Polish birth and marriage certificate. But there are mostly no difficulties with that. It's a straightforward process. The other leg, I guess, of the journey is the confirmation of citizenship. And that goes to the voivodeship office, as I mentioned. And that can take 6, 9, or 12 months, or even sometimes longer, just depending on how well the documentation is prepared. But there are delays, especially now with COVID. Even things like post, it sometimes takes between Warsaw and Łódź, where our office is, it's 140 kilometers, and it takes a month for a letter to arrive.
Wow.
It's a little bit difficult to estimate. However, on average, it takes about 8 or 9 months to get it approved.
That's great. It's so exciting that you can have an entirely new citizenship within that time. It seems like a while, but for what you're gaining, it's worth it.
Yeah, it's really worthwhile. And I think it depends which other country you compare it to. Like for Italy or Greece, it can take 3 or 6 years even. So I think, to some extent, the delays happen for a couple of reasons if they do happen. One is that Poland does not accept electronic submissions. You do have to provide everything in hard copy, and there is certainly requirements of how to present those documents. Everything has to be translated, but things have to be with apostilles, and they don't accept PDFs or photocopies. It just needs to be done in the way that they want it to be done. But also the office that handles this application is often short-staffed and overworked, because they receive something like 10,000 applications every year. So you basically just go into a queue. So if your application is very straightforward, it'll still go into a queue. You know, sometimes people will be like, well, it's so simple. My father was Polish. Why is it taking such a long time? But that's because the workload doesn't allow them to put you in front of the queue just because you have a simple case. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And are there any other points you'd like to bring up before we finish up our session in a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of how the process happens and what sort of documents you need to provide, the answer is it depends. So I say this all the time to everybody. Please speak to your extended family, particularly if you have family in Poland, because they may have records, they may have documents, they may have information even. So if you're starting from nothing, you know, many of our clients will know who their grandfather or grandmother or great-grandparents were, but that's all they have. Sometimes they don't even know the names, because if you think about it, we're going back, 100 years, and people immigrated and they got on with their lives, whether it's in America or Australia or New Zealand, and they didn't really think of the Polish citizenship being cool right now, or coveted. So if your information is very basic and maybe potentially not reliable, speak to everybody you can. Also be careful with platforms like ancestry.com, where people might have family trees, because often they're incorrect. And you don't need to have knowledge about everybody. You just need to have knowledge about your direct ancestors that you can apply for your citizenship under. And I would also recommend that people dig in a bit deeper than what they understand, and be curious about their family history, because the secondary benefit of going through this process, of course, is regaining your identity and linking up to your ancestral homeland that your ancestors left for all kinds of reasons, sometimes political, sometimes due to poverty. And I think, everybody that starts this journey with us starts with wanting a EU passport and ends up with so much more. And I think many people are really grateful for that. And, when you discover these things about your family you didn't know, in our work, we sometimes discover bigamies and adoptions and, I don't want to call them lie, but let's say, stretched truth. And for all kinds of reasons. And sometimes people had to change their age to be able to come to Australia, or to be able to serve in the army, or not serve in the army, or to marry somebody, or like we're talking about for most of our clients, period just after the war. So that was a very confusing and difficult time. So if you're starting this journey, or if you're considering starting this journey, gather everything and write it all out in a very basic family tree. So don't worry about 1653. Think about you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, so that there's clarity about where people were born, where they come from, and what happened to them after they left Poland, if that was the case.
Great, thanks so much, Eva. So just to summarize, for gaining Polish citizenship through descent, always necessary to write up your family tree so that you've got an overview of who your ancestors are, and then trying to find as much documentation as you can, always remembering to ask family members if they have anything. And what's your third summary point?
Okay, the last tip I would say is get in contact with us, because we do carry out eligibility assessments completely free of charge, and we'll tell you if you qualify or not. And, the number of times I hear from people, oh, but my, I'm definitely Polish, and my, my case is really easy. And then when we start digging into it, we discover, all kinds of complications. It's better to know and we will tell you upfront, and we'll tell you the truth about your eligibility. And then you can make a decision if you want to work with us or not. It's, you know, there's no obligation to proceed, but you will receive our eligibility report based on your family tree documentation you have and a plan of action, essentially. So if you want to pursue this with us, or, you know, even somebody else, at least you'll have it mapped out, and you'll have it assessed in a professional way to tell you exactly if you qualify and why, because we do apply the legislation to your case, just to be very clear and precise about your eligibility.
Yeah, that's very helpful for people, and the fact that it's free, it's a bit of a no-brainer almost. So that's our session for today. Just a reminder to everyone to subscribe to our Facebook page, follow our YouTube channels, because we do upload a lot of great content to help you gain Polish citizenship. Thank you so much, Eva.
Thanks, Stephanie.